Welcome, Sip&Talkers, to what has been, an absolutely wild week. I seriously think the news cycle short-circuited my brain. Who even needs coffee anymore?
Good to be here. Yeah, there was a lot of noise this week, to put it mildly.
Noise is an understatement. So did you see that video that went viral? The one with, hundreds of thousands of people supposedly celebrating Maduro's arrest on the streets in Venezuela?
I did.
And then I'm scrolling, and almost immediately you see all these U.S. social media accounts going, nope, look at the crowd, look at the lighting. That's 100% AI generated.
Right.
And I'm thinking, are we there now? Is this where we live? If a reality doesn't fit your political view, you just pull the deep fake escape hatch.
Well, it's a fascinating and, pretty concerning thing to watch happen in real time. Because it's not just about technical skepticism anymore.
It feels bigger than that.
It is. It's become a kind of psychological defense mechanism. Think about it. If you have a really rigid anti-intervention worldview, seeing real oppressed people celebrating a U.S. military action, it creates this painful conflict in your head.
Cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. And just yelling, "It's AI," is the quickest, easiest way to resolve that conflict without having to, rethink your entire political framework.
Okay, we have to unpack all of this because this event, the U.S. operation, the arrest, the global reaction, it's just the perfect storm.
It truly is. So for this Sip and Talk, we have a clear mission. First, let's just establish the verified facts, the timeline, what actually happened.
Ground zero.
Then we can explore these cognitive and geopolitical conflicts that bubble up when truth itself is so easily dismissed. And finally, I think we need to analyze the internal contradictions that made the Maduro regime so fragile to begin with.
Okay, so let's ground ourselves. The core event we're talking about is Operation Southern Spear.
Executed by Delta Force, January 3rd, 2026. This was the operation that successfully arrested Nicolas Maduro and his wife near Caracas.
And the U.S. justification for, arresting a sitting head of state.
They cited the 2020 narco-terrorism charges. That was their official legal basis for the intervention. And it wasn't a small thing. It involved airstrikes on military targets like the La Carlota Air Base.
So we have the action. Now let's get into the first big theme, fact versus fiction. This geography of joy and what you call the liar's dividend.
Right, because we absolutely have to distinguish the verified reality from those sensationalized viral claims. The joy was real. It just wasn't where people thought it was.
You're talking about the diaspora.
Exactly. The joy was massive. It was genuine, but it was concentrated among the estimated 8 million Venezuelan expats. You saw these huge, vibrant celebrations in South Florida, especially in Doral, or Dorosuela, as they call it.
Oh, yeah. And in Santiago, Madrid, Bogota.
All over. People waving flags, singing, just this massive collective shout of freedom. A really powerful, cathartic moment for millions who've been in forced exile.
You can only imagine the relief.
But the key fact is the scale. Verified reports from outlets like the AP and CBS consistently said thousands in any one location, not the hundreds of thousands figure that went viral and, sparked all the deep fake accusations.
Okay, so that's the story outside Venezuela. What about inside? Was there a big party happening in Caracas?
It was a completely different scene, starkly different.
Really?
Yeah, Reuters, The Guardian, they all described Caracas as deserted, or at the very least full of heavy tension, especially right after the U.S. airstrikes.
That's all right. No.
The local reporting suggested the dominant emotion was a very complex cocktail of hope mixed with fear.
That's a heavy cocktail.
It is. People were focused on basic survival, trying to find water, electricity. They weren't rushing into the streets. And more importantly, a lot of people were just paralyzed with fear.
Fear of what?
The colectivos, the pro-government armed groups. They were still out there, still patrolling. And that silence, that absence of celebration in the capital is just so crucial to understanding everything that came next.
Because that silence gets used as evidence by both sides, doesn't it?
Precisely.
Right.
Which brings us back to that psychological AI shield.
Right. Why did that "it's AI" argument catch on so fast?
It's the perfect out. As we said, if your worldview is U.S. intervention is always bad, then seeing thousands of grateful, liberated people celebrating that very thing is an existential threat to your narrative.
So you just call it fake?
You call it fake. It lets you dismiss the inconvenient facts and hold on to your belief that America is just the imperial aggressor no matter what the actual Venezuelans feel.
Okay, but let me push back a little here. We know deepfakes are real. We know how easy they are to generate. So isn't a little skepticism about some random viral video healthy? You can't blame people for not trusting it immediately.
That's a critical point, and you're absolutely right. Skepticism is warranted. It's necessary. But what we saw here wasn't just skepticism. It was the immediate weaponization of skepticism.
Yeah.
And that gets to the liar's dividend.
Okay, define liar's dividend for us.
It's the perverse benefit that liars get in a world with very low trust. So when everyone knows that AI can fake a video...
Like the AI news anchors some Venezuelan journalists were using to stay safe.
Exactly. When that's the baseline, the actual verified truth becomes so much harder to defend. It gives cover to anyone who just doesn't want to believe the facts. The real danger isn't the fake video itself. It's the blanket distrust that lets people dismiss any reality they don't like as just another deepfake.
It's the ultimate intellectual get-out-of-jail-free card.
Okay, so let's pivot from the psychology to the full-on legal and geopolitical train wreck this caused.
Yes, the geopolitical collision. The sovereign shield versus the humanitarian right. This is where it gets messy.
So the U.S. side is pretty simple. They're just saying we're enforcing international criminal law with those 2020 charges. That's their argument. But on the other side, you have basically every international legal expert on the planet
Immediately pointing to a massive violation.
a violation of UN Charter Article 2.4, the part that prohibits using force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state.
The argument being you can't just send Delta Force into another country to grab their leader, no matter what they're accused of.
That's the core of it. And this perfectly sets up what you could call the dictator's paradox.
Right, because why did all these other authoritarian regimes around the world get so angry? They probably hated Maduro.
They probably did. But for a dictator, sovereignty isn't a principle, it's an immunity shield. Their entire power structure depends on being free from external consequences. And the U.S. action just proved that the shield can fail.
So it's not about defending Maduro, it's about defending the principle that keeps him safe.
100%. Their condemnation comes from a place of pure fear. The thinking is, if the U.S. can grab Maduro today, well, I could be next tomorrow.
And so they turn that fear outward.
They convert it into internal nationalist anger. They frame the U.S. as the big, evil overlord threatening the nation. And that, in turn, justifies their own crackdowns at home.
Which brings us to this idea of menu shopping international law.
It's the fundamental tension in the world today. You have the liberal international order, which focuses on human rights and can justify an intervention like this. And then you have the authoritarian order, focused on nationalism and territory, which holds sovereignty as absolute.
And both sides are kind of bending the rules to fit their own interests.
They're both accused of it, which is why the whole system feels so brittle right now.
And when the U.S., which is supposed to be a champion of the liberal order, breaks a rule like sovereignty, that's a huge gift to the other side, isn't it?
It's the propagandist's gift. It's a crucial insight. Because even if you do it for the right reasons, for justice, you hand authoritarian leaders perfect propaganda on a silver platter.
It lets them whitewash their own violence.
Exactly. They can just turn around and say, look, the U.S. kidnapped a head of state, so my little crackdown on dissent, that's just a special judicial action, too. It creates a false moral equivalence.
It just muddies the water and makes it harder to call out the real bad actors. Okay, let's take that tension down to the ground level, the clashing realities between, say, China's view and what people in Caracas were hoping for.
The cognitive gap there is just massive. I mean, for China's foreign ministry, this was immediately condemned as a gross violation of international law and hegemonic behavior.
Which is standard diplomatic speak, but what's the real fear underneath it all?
It's all about absolute sovereign stability. For any non-U.S. ally, this sets a terrifying precedent. It suggests a stronger power can just change your regime whenever it wants. For China, especially with issues like Taiwan, the idea of inviolable sovereignty is everything.
And that high-level geopolitical fear is completely disconnected from the reality for someone in Venezuela.
Completely. For them, it's about survival. You look at the IMF data on the economic collapse, the hyperinflation. You understand why the average person prioritizes who can feed me over abstract legal principles.
For them, Maduro's sovereignty was the disaster.
It was the disaster.
Yeah.
So in that context, external intervention doesn't feel like a violation. It feels like the only hope for change. Your hero is my terrorist.
A rescue versus terrorist aggression. It's the perfect split.
It really is. Geopolitical rivals see a threat to the global order, while desperate citizens see a lifeline.
And this all circles back to that image of the empty street in Caracas. the silence.
Right, because the interpretation of that silence is still the defining ambiguity of this whole event.
Yeah.
China, some anti-war groups in the U.S., they see the empty streets and say, see, proof the locals reject the invasion.
Whereas the Venezuelan opposition sees that same silence and interprets it as profound fear.
Fear of the colectivos who are still armed and on the streets. A BBC reporter on the ground really highlighted this nuance. In this era, an empty street can be evidence of both protest against an invasion and fear while you wait for a new dawn.
We have to resist simplifying that. That complexity feels like the real story. Okay, let's use that as a transition. The external pressure was obviously huge, but the regime only collapsed because the structure was already rotten from the inside, right?
Absolutely. Dictatorships are inherently unstable. The very act of concentrating power creates these self-destructing contradictions.
Okay, so what's contradiction number one?
Power concentration versus internal insecurity. The dictator's dilemma. To stay in power, you need absolute, unquestioning loyalty to prevent a coup.
Which means you have to constantly purge your inner circle.
Constant purges, constant infighting. To achieve loyalty, you foster maximum insecurity among your closest allies. And that just breeds chronic inefficiency because every decision is based on loyalty, not on merit.
You see that in other regimes that fell, like Mubarak in Egypt or Gaddafi in Libya.
For sure. The internal chaos they create to maintain control eventually becomes the soft spot, the crack in the armor that external pressure can finally break.
And then there's the economic angle. In Venezuela, I mean, it was once the richest country in the region.
Which is contradiction number two. Economic growth versus political control. Dictators often use economic success to legitimize their rule.
The promise of stability, prosperity.
Right. But any real economic growth creates new, powerful classes, oligarchs, a middle class, and those people inevitably start demanding political independence.
And the leader is forced to choose.
They have to prioritize political loyalty over economic efficiency. In Venezuela, that meant putting loyal but incompetent military generals in charge of the state oil company instead of, people who knew how to run an oil company. You choose political survival over economic health, and eventually the economy sinks the whole ship.
And the final contradiction is when the lie just becomes too big to maintain.
Contradiction 3. Ideology versus reality. Regimes rely on these powerful ideologies, nationalism, socialism, to keep everyone on the same page. But when reality, like empty store shelves and no running water, so blatantly contradicts the state propaganda.
At that moment when state TV is telling you everything's great, but you're standing in line for a bottle of water.
The gap becomes unbridgeable. Trust just collapses catastrophically. And because these systems have no safety valves, no free press, no real elections, there's no way to resolve the crisis. The whole thing just implodes. Operation Southern Spear was just the final push on a structure that was already hollow.
Wow. We've covered a ton of ground here, from the weaponization of its AI to the inherent rot of authoritarianism.
I think the main takeaway is that painful collision the science shows us. You have the cold logic of great power politics on one side, which demands sovereignty at all costs.
And the visceral, raw emotion of human survival on the other. The person on the street in Caracas.
And we have to look past the grand narratives and the AI debates to those specific silent people on the ground. The ones who are scared, but maybe, sending messages on WhatsApp saying there's light at the end of the tunnel. That complexity is the truth.
So, as we wrap up, what's the provocative thought you want to leave everyone with to ponder?
Here it is. If the international legal framework really is collapsing, with both sides just menu shopping for rules that suit them, what is the long-term cost of pursuing justice through unilateral force? And maybe more importantly, where do we find a stable basis for truth when anyone can just declare an inconvenient reality to be AI generated?
That is the core question facing all of us right now. Something to definitely chew on.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to stay informed, please be sure to subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your podcasts.
And a special shout out to our old friend Mickey, whose YouTube channel Mickey to Life has some fun memes and new travel vlogs you should definitely check out.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time.